Tochoyo sambo pa gyo trashi pa tuche tempe chinle yarngo da pelge drolo zambe tse parache pande lame shabla solwa de omo agu sumatimu nisha sane kar uta vardani shri bhadra varsa manya sarva siddhi Om Guru Vajradhara Sumatimu Nishasane Kar Uta Vardanya Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Om Guru Vajradhara Sumatimu Nisha Uta Vardanya Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Om Guru Vajradhara Sumatimu Nishasane Kar Uta Vardanya Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Om Guru Vajradhara Sumatimu Nishasane Kar Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Om Guru Vajradhara Sumatimu Nishasane Kar Uta Vardanya Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Dagi Jitsun Lama Tuje Che Nyamda Dala Tuje Sikso So Gebe Shesan Dala Tendo So Uyon Sunge Nawa Tsedo So Tsechi Nyingne Solwa Debe Tse Dejen Korlo Visu Lekshu Ne Yela Sambe Deden Malupa Geme Lunge Drupra Chingi Lo Tsoni Sodan Dikdun Shakpe Tse Dungi Nam Ke Yin So Lekshu Ne Lapchen tsonyi yonso tsopa tan cheranye tun chamara chingelo chancho pargi nintzen tukun to nyo peme siudru lekshone chancho drube gegen kunshishi tungen de la drubra chingelo dagi lona chola chokpa dan chemin samjur ngenba shiwa dan chedan tumbe deden malupa beme lunge drubra chingelo Dorna tingne tsira tamche dan teche pardone kav tamche tu rese kyamne lama kele me tukche chingi dala sikso so gongyab drewe nyamda dach tuje rabgongne kudan sungi nawa dralme tu nyam sunyongwe kesan topra sho kewa kuntu yanda lama dan drame cheki pela longche chin sadan lamge yunde rabzo Dorje change kopa nyur top sho pakyuke kudan dagi lo pakyuke sundan dagi nga pakyuke tukdan dagi yi ten yerme chiktu chingi lo makyuke kudan dagi lo Ma kyuke sundan dagi nga Ma kyuke tukdan dagi yi Tün yerme çıktı çingi olo Om muni muni Maha muni Shakya muni Svoha Sashipu ki choshimeto Chamare ravalingashi Nide gempadi Sange shintu mikte ulvarki drokununam dashingla chöpar shoyi Yatna Mindrala Kam Niryatayami Sangye Chedan Tsogi Chonam Lai Jancho Pardo Dani Kyapsu Chi Dagi Jinso Gibe Sonam Ki Drola Pinchira Sangye Drupar Sho Sangye Chedan Tsogi Chonam La Jancho Pardo Dani Kyapsu Chi Dagi Jinso Gibe Sonam Ki Drola Pinchira Sangye Drupar Sho Sangye Chedan Tsogi Chonam La Jancho Pardo Dani Dagi Jinso Gibe Sonam Ki Drola Pinchira Sangye Drupar Sho.
In the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, I take refuge until enlightenment. With the practice of generosity and the other perfections, may I obtain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings.
In the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, I take refuge unto enlightenment through the practice of generosity and the other perfections. May I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. Namo Alhaye Keda Ludan Jinke Rubunana Mikanam Dan Rubakum Getanam Chitsampa Tamche Kedu Dagi Cheten Tamche Kedu Dagi Cheten. Buongiorno.
Good morning.
Quando abbiamo visto la prima domanda,
When we looked at the first question,
abbiamo affrontato uno dei temi
w-
più importanti,
we faced one of the most important subjects, which is why do we do what we do?
capire che
Understand that behind, be it the recitation of a mantra or a teaching that we're going to follow, or read a text, a moment of meditation, an act of generosity, everything that we do along our path,
in fondo perché lo faccio?
really, why do we do it?
La verità è che la
And the
risposta
truth is, it's not so easy.
la risposta
The answer is not that easy. I mean, technically, it is easy, but generating that in the depth of our being is not that easy. Lama Tsongkhapa himself would say, this is extremely difficult. What?
generare questo
Gener- generating this intent to want to really to get out of the cycle of samsara, which at the same time means to really reach a state of inner peace that is sustainable and long lasting as priority number one above everything else. Often we have this idea that inner peace, what a wonderful thing. But in the meantime, I need to do this, I need to do that. There's that person who bothers me, there's that situation that I need to fix, and here and there. And then once I've resolved all those things, then at that point, I can take care of my inner peace. Actually, it doesn't work like that. So Lama Tsongkhapa, in his great kindness, that first question, he shows us the direction. Why did Buddha teach what he taught? What's the reason that why would anyone who gets close to Buddha's teachings is number one? It, 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 the answer is one. And actually, Panchen Lutsen Shukik Gyaltsen divided it into two. He said the first reason is to find a state of well-being and balance within the reality in which one finds himself. That first reason why Buddha taught everything he taught and transmitted what he transmitted, the first reason, I mean, it has meaning for us, putting it all into practice, this teachings, meditation. It's to find what's called a superior state, a balance, a state of well-being, where one is good enough physically and mentally, and that's already a lot. And I think that most of us, when we get close to Buddhism, we're going mostly in that direction. Actually, what we want, I mean, we don't want to suffer anymore. We don't want sadness or anxiety or fear or dissatisfaction. We want to be well. And we understand somehow that this state of well-being cannot depend exclusively on external factors. And so we say, I want to work on myself. I want to change my worldview. I want to look at my lifestyle, how I eat, where I go, what I do, how I sleep, and also my inner conduct, how I act, my emotions, how I react, how I interact. I want to find a balanced state of being where I can be well enough. And this is the first part of the objective, because the deeper reason why Buddha taught everything that he taught, and that why it would make sense for us to get into contact with these teachings, is to be able on a deeper level to take away all the unhealthy dynamics that we have. In other words, reach a state of peace and balance and satisfaction that is actually sustainable. Get out of samsara. This is our higher objective, but let's say how things actually are. It's not that obvious to reach that type of desire. The first one, you follow, right? I mean, we're here mostly because we want to. I mean, are we here because we want to be good Buddhists, or we find that through these methods, these teachings, that there's support to find a certain balance of ourselves and with others? I would say for most of us, this is the reason. But there's another important level, and Lama Tsongkhapa reminds us that it's not easy to reach this falling in love with inner peace, this wanting to get out of the cycle of cycle of suffering, samsara, to get rid of getting rid of this kidney pain, or getting rid of these gallstones. I mean, when we have the gallstones, we want just that pain to stop. And to generate something like that, it's just not obvious. So Lama Tsongkhapa, he asks other questions to help us generate this desire. Why? Wanting to reach this state of well-being that we discussed before is similar to wanting to get rid of symptoms. And even though we have a sickness, we see that we have a sickness with symptoms, and we see that it's possible to live with a sickness without the symptoms. So that would be lesser objective, to live with the sickness without the symptoms. And then a higher objective, a deeper objective, would be wanting to really get rid of that unbalance that creates the sickness, and wanting the desire to really rid oneself completely of the sickness. And that's difficult because when the symptoms are not manifest, when they're not present, we care very little about having an illness or not. So how can I get how can I get rid of a sickness? Like, how can I get rid of a sickness if I don't have symptoms? We need to know it. We need to know it. We need to, similar to when we see an example. I mean, we take an exam. Um, I've seen I've seen this happen, that people go and they take exams, and they have the tiniest um, tumor. They have, for example, like a tumor on the thyroid. So, so one knowing the one knowing all the dangers of what could happen, one tries to face all of it. So they could actually remove that organ completely. I mean, so here similarly, we really need to know. Um, so wanting to live a life without symptoms, even though we have this illness of selfishness. I mean, wanting to live balanced and happy, and knowing that to have that, we need to have a healthy life, physically and mentally. I mean, this we all understand. That first step requires anyway a fundamental step, which is when we stop victimizing ourselves, where we take responsibility. We take responsibility in our own hands. We say that we want to be well. We want to be well. We want to help other people around us. This is Cherezek. This is open eyes Cherezek, who shows clarity of all things. So, first of all, as I was saying, we need to have clarity about what we want to do, because wanting to be in a balanced state and be free from symptoms, it's not enough. It's not enough to want others to change. And we need to take this step where we stop victimizing ourselves and we take responsibility in our own hands. And we need to have a healthy life, a healthy lifestyle, if we want to be well. Hmm? Are you all following? Do you agree? This means, how do I eat? How do I relate to other people? What is my lifestyle? How do I work? My exercise? Learning how to face my own emotions, meditation, and all the rest. The healthy relationships with other people. Today, at a certain point, I was looking at the news. Usually, I look at them once a day, and there was something that made me smile. On the BBC, and it says the ten things to make you happy in 2025, and the second one was scientific research, our so-called modern religion, and one was having more compassion, and then another word that I had never heard before, or maybe they invented in English, which is with happiness. So felicity. Anyway, it's compassion. Or it's not compassion. It's having joy. I mean, feeling joy for others. And seeing the list, it is based on scientific research. I mean, a great part of it was part of science of Buddhist teaching. But I'm really happy that they're teachings. I mean, we live in an epoch, in a time. Um, to say that something is valid, we need to quote unquote prove it. Our friend Rohir, who is a researcher and a professor, a doctor, he says the colleagues they do research on important things, and sometimes I look around and I think it's so ridiculous to put so much effort into proving the obvious. And this is the world in which we live in. But good that we prove things that are good for us. All of this to say, I imagine that most of us were already on this at this level. We need to put it into practice better, better aspects have to do with having a healthy lifestyle, physically, mentally, with relationships. And in my opinion, this is where most of us already are. Not having realized a perfectly healthy lifestyle, but certainly wanting that and setting that as an objective. But there's a next step. It's not just about having a healthy lifestyle, a healthy life, but wanting, in addition to having a healthy life, we want to go deeper to eliminate the deeper causes that exist and cause our suffering, to be able to generate a sustainable level of peace and balance. And wanting that, we need to really understand what this sickness is. And here, Lama Tsongkhapa asks us the second question. There are 58 questions, so I mean, we're not in a hurry to finish this text, but little by little we need to go on. The second question says, today I'd like to look at the second and the third. The fourth is
mikpa shem machikis ne tamsa chik ne komnas chingyo yongsa yoba te kains mitakpa gomba tabuang kuncho sumla solwa deba tabuans dikpa shakpan chanchu ki sim gombans chindrua loba tabu yin serwa on setes tenam gi kyang ke shindu chewar oyong menans tege tegi nyongwa dömbe migur ne dönümba gyalwe sung ngoshebe tarpa tönyer lo çöbu mimba kewe tap tamba shik yönanwes teitriwa os shingso kebe trulk dektres tardo shukra kebe taps gyatsap tambe sumbashi tamche kemba rangni kyangs dukde nimi masamna tardo chishi mike sons korwe nyega sembe tsuls mayang dungal gis jigne tardo chuknang yos sakche tsorwa dewales yijung chiro palangchi tena duche rangshinki sakche nyerlin pumbodi dunga drube ne dan dre dan sungu tars mingne komna chingyo la.
Here's the second question by Lama Tsongkhapa. Therefore, what has more impact when is meditated on from another approach of a strict meditation, like the technique of an expert carpenter lifting his tool with more effect? Here, he's asking us, okay, good, but there are so many techniques out there that Buddha taught. If we were to ask ourselves to generate this, what should we meditate on? What's the most expert technique? Like a carpenter has many tools, but there's one tool without which he can't do anything, let's say. So there must be but one primary tool that knows how to use well. So you need some tool at the basis. So what would be that fundamental tool along our path above everything else? And Lama Tsongkhapa, he gives his own hypothetical answer. It's possible that there are some who proclaim to practice such as making a prayer of request to the three jewels. So what's the main practice? The main tool is making a prayer request to Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, or making or confessing one's negativities openly, or meditating on the mind of enlightenment, bodhicitta, or training him or herself in the six perfections. All important things. Because meditating on these things brings indeed much more difference. It means meditating on these aspects brings a great effect, benefit. In this context, meditating on these things actually indeed creates a more positivity. It's something positive. Yet it appears that there is a superior means to generate an uncontrived awareness seeking liberation, where one knows that the victor has taught to emphasize those respective cycles of visualization which enhance one's experience of the relevant subject. Therefore, I ask this question. So, if you tell me that the most important tool is to ask for blessings, or meditating on bodhicitta, or the six perfections, yes, these things are beneficial, but there's something else. There's a tool that is even more important to generate that passion that we talked about before, that passion of wanting to get out of samsara and reach that so-called nirvana and inner peace. What is this tool? This is the question that Lama Tsongkhapa is asking. Why is this so important? Because, as we said many times, the first thing that we need to do for something to happen is desiring it. And if we come into contact with the teachings in our path, and what we want is a state of balance, a healthy life, which is something positive, then we'll put that energy into reaching that. If instead, if our deep desire transcends that and is about getting out of the cycle of suffering, we will put energy there. And this is the basis. In Tibetan, it's said nejung, which this translation is a little strange because for a long time it's been translated as renunciation, but in my opinion, it's it's not a good translation. It'd be more correct to say the definitive emergence, this certainty of getting out, the certainty of being to emerge, to get out of suffering and reach a state of peace and joy in a sustainable way. Nebar junwa. Nebar is certainty, and juwa is to get out of one situation and go towards another. Nebar junwa. And so in some cases, so if we use an English translation, which is definitive emergence, and then translated into Italian, it sounds like there's an emergency, which is even more wrong. So this feeling, this inner feeling, this definitive emergence, this certainty to be able to get out of the cycle of suffering and reach a state of peace and balance that transcends suffering, is this this is also love towards oneself, loving oneself. This feeling, this inner state, is said to be the door that opens the path towards liberation, liberation of suffering, and this state of Buddhahood, without which is difficult to go in that direction. That's why it's so important. So here, Lama Tsongkhapa puts emphasis. So even if you've understood why it's so important to develop this feeling, what do you do to actually generate it? So it can happen that we get close to Buddhism and we meditate on a certain Buddha, on the six perfections, or the correct view of reality. Wonderful, but there's something at the basis that is the most powerful tool to generate this inner state of renunciation, this definitive emergence. And here, Panchen Losang Chökyi Gyaltsen answers. The technique to generate an intense wish for liberation, like the technique of an expert carpenter who lifts up a mechanical tool, or it's an analogy. It's an analogy that is difficult for me to understand its context, but certainly it makes reference to some kind of sutra, so some kind of tool where you can lift something very heavy with something very light. But as taught by the sublime Master Gyaltsab, one of the main disciples of Lama Tsongkhapa. Even the omniscient himself, which is Bodhi Shakyamuni, if you do not think of the shortcomings of, it's not true suffering, but it's the truth of suffering, the genuine wish for liberation will not be generated. There are many ways of thinking about the shortcomings of samsara. However, the wish for freedom due to the fear of the suffering also exists in the mental continuum of cattle. It's to say, like a cow tries to avoid the feeling of suffering, and any being found in the suffering of suffering would try to be free of that. It's normal. Nothing against cows, but it's something you don't need much to want to get out of the suffering that you're feeling, that's manifest in your sensations. Renunciation. So renouncing this, here we're using renouncing, this certainty to get out of suffering, the suffering of suffering. So renouncing the happiness of contaminated feeling. So the certainty of being able to get out of the happiness of contaminated feeling can arise also in the mental continuum of a non-Buddhist or a Buddhist. So he's making reference to understanding that the feelings of pleasure cannot sustain a state of happiness. And many spiritual traditions have this awareness, especially in ancient India. There were many meditators and practitioners who had this scope of trying to stop sensation in general. The unpleasant feelings, but also pleasurable feelings. And there are many techniques where you enter into meditative states where one enters into a kind of neutral state or kind of frozen state, and one can stay like that for long, long periods. So it's states of consciousness that are very, very deep, where one cuts contact with one's sensations. Buddha Shakyamuni um, says that he did this kind of practice also for a long time. So, but once you finish that meditation, the sensations come back. It's a little bit like, I mean, if we use a more modern term, what happens is when there's a feeling of pleasure, chemically speaking, dopamine is generated, is created. And the nature of dopamine is the more dopamine there is, the deeper is the fall of the void, the lack, once that dopamine is not there anymore. So being without sensation is not the answer. Uh, it's part of the problem. I mean, that's already something, but it doesn't resolve the problem. So Panchano Sanchoke Gyatsen says here happiness is dewa in Tibetan. And dewa can be translated also as pleasure or bliss, enjoyment. It, in this context, it's not really happiness, it's more like pleasure. So renouncing the pleasure of contaminated feeling, those pleasurable sensations that cannot sustain a state of pleasure. They can arise also in the mental continuum of non-Buddhist, different traditions, but only if one observed the perpetuating aggregates, the pervasive suffering of compositional factors which are naturally accommodated and meditated upon them as a provider of suffering and receptacle of sufferings like a sickness, tumor, and pain, one could save oneself from being drowned in sufferings. Let me explain. Yesterday, we looked at this, the analogy of the sickness. There's the sickness, there's the symptoms, and then there's the actual sickness. I mean, when I feel pain, and I recognize it, that it's part of the sickness, then I can understand that the pain is linked to the sickness. But if I have a sickness without a symptom, then it's harder to really understand the sickness and want to get rid of that sickness. But when I'm able to see that the main problem is not the feeling of suffering, that's a symptom. The symptom of pleasure is not a problem, but it's not the solution either, because it can't be upheld. But my body and my mind, my being, here what being, we're talking, it says compositional factor. This is our impermanent being that's composed of many, many factors. No, we're not one thing. We are many, many. This is duce in Tibetan. They are naturally contaminated. So our body and our mind are naturally contaminated by what? By ignorance, by selfishness, by anger, by hatred, by resentment, dissatisfaction, attachment, fear, and by the karmic inertia of the actions that have been computed up till now. This together makes it so that inevitably there's suffering. So if we were to ask ourselves, what is the sickness? It's the body and the mind that are polluted by mental defilements and karma. And And it's only understanding this that one could save oneself from being drowned in sufferings. So when one meditates on this, the, if we if we think about what is generating our suffering, it's that our being is polluted. What we live on the outside, these are conditions through which our state of unbalance manifests. I remember once many years ago, maybe some of you were present, this is at least 15 years ago in Milan. We at the terme, their terme in Milano, these like hot springs in Milan, and there was a doctor who was speaking, and this doctor, I remember, he talked about sicknesses created by the environment, and he was saying that sicknesses that are caused by pollution, environmental pollution, will show up as the symptoms maybe 15 years after the actual pollution. So if I pollute the air today, that pollution will generate sickness in someone in minimum 15 years. So what happens is when someone gets sick, that immediate moment, that pollution is a condition, but the cause came much earlier. So when we suffer, when we have our conflicts, our sufferings of all type, what one says or the situations that we live that are hurtful or harmful to us, those are just conditions through which our inner state of being, mental defilements and karma, our polluted state interacts and then manifests the symptoms of malaise. In other words, I've said this, I've talked about this experience a few times. A few years ago, during a similar period, there were two situations. One was really difficult, connected to death, but I saw that it was a very difficult situation, but I didn't suffer much. It didn't take away my balance. Obviously, if you asked me if I would want that situation to repeat itself, I'd say no, but I'm not afraid of it either. Just a few days later, in the same week, I lived another experience that apparently was quite banal, nothing important, but I lived it really badly, and I asked myself why. That situation where, generally speaking, let's say most people would have lived it badly, and I didn't. And this other situation that was so simple was causing me so much trouble. And observing myself, I saw that in that first situation, it was almost like the situation in front of me emanates a kind of sound inside of me, and if it finds something to resonate, something unresolved, some kind of wound, I live that present moment through that. In that first case, even though that sound was very, very loud, it didn't find anything that resonated back, and I lived it with a relative neutrality. Instead, in that second situation, that sound, that small sound, it found something, it resonated something within me, and I lived it as such. So the causes are our body and mind that are polluted by our mental defilements, ignorance, selfishness, anger, jealousy, envy, fear, our various traumas, negative conditioning, and the strength of the actions that we have already done, and we bring this inertia of these actions with us, and we live our present through these through the actions of the past. I mean, this is why we suffer. So here, Panchen Lotchen Chiki Gyatso says the real tool to generate that desire of getting out of samsara is understanding the deeper dynamics of samsara itself. And this comes through the Four Noble Truths, the first and the second. Actually, here we're talking about the first, that then is like a bridge to the second Noble Truth, which is understanding all permeating suffering and recognizing all permeating suffering as suffering. This, maybe I said everything. For someone, maybe to someone, it means nothing. Let me explain better. As long as I see pleasure as a solution to suffering, what would happen? I have a state of malaise. I try to get something that makes me feel better, and I feel good when I have that experience. When that experience is over, that thing comes back, no? And this is what we do with everything. What happens is, okay, we feel sad. What do we do when we feel sad? Do we try to understand why? What is manifesting? Every once in a while, yes, but the sadness of every day, no. We try to find something for that sadness to pass. Like when a small child, a technique that some parents have going around. Maybe a child says, "I want this." I mean, we're very stubborn and won't let go. I want. Okay, the mother, the father doesn't want to take that thing. So what technique do they use? Look at that other thing there. And it brings attention somewhere else. This is what we do with ourselves. I have sadness. I don't have the maturity to face it completely, so I take my attention somewhere else. I bring my attention somewhere else. I pick up my telephone. I talk to a friend. I eat something. I drink something. I smoke something. One looks for his own methods to get out of that state. What happens is when we're distracted by that and we experience something pleasurable, and then at a certain point that effect ends, but that wound, that inner wound that we have, manifests again. I think that it's a dynamic that we can all recognize. This is that first level that we find ourselves in naturally. We try to avoid suffering, but we don't understand that looking for pleasure, and there's nothing wrong in and of itself, but it's not a true solution. We take refuge in that false solution. Yesterday we gave the day before yesterday we gave the example of the seesaw. We try to get rid of the being down on the seesaw by getting up on the seesaw. In other words, we take refuge in the suffering of change to get out of the suffering of suffering. In other words, we try to get out of the suffering, taking refuge in pleasurable states that are not sustainable, and often in pleasure itself. The second level is when I understand that those pleasures, and there's nothing wrong with them, but they can't uphold my happiness. And I'm tired, up and down, up and down, up and down. And that's enough. I don't want to do that anymore. But at that point, to get out of that, The next level is understanding that the real problem, what we really need to resolve, is not the feeling of pleasure or pain. Those are only symptoms. But it's really a deep state of imbalance um, that we find ourselves in, caused by living reality in an incoherent way. And that comes in question number 4. There's the aspect of our obsession with self-gratification and anger, resentment, jealousy, fear, unlimited desire, and unlimited dissatisfaction. This all makes it so that we live things badly, and that sensation comes back. And this is called all permeating suffering. It's not a sensation of suffering in and of itself, but it's the body and mind, our being, that is polluted by mental defilements and karma. Are you following? So to be able to see that momentary pleasure as the nature of suffering is an important step. It's of the nature of suffering, not because it is suffering, but because sooner or later it will show up as such. But the important step we need to make here is being able to see deeply this all permeating suffering as suffering. What does that mean, seeing it as suffering? Meaning that it's something that I want to eliminate, abandon, get rid of. Suffering is, once I recognize it as such, we want to get rid of it. We want to avoid it. Like pain, like the pain of a gallstone passing or a tumor. We don't want to hold on to the sickness. We want to overcome it, get rid of it. So if we were able, or when we will be able to recognize sincerely, deeply, that as long as my being is polluted by this ignorance and selfishness and all these mental defilements, and together is taken by the inertia of the actions of the past, inevitably suffering will manifest regardless of where I will be, with whom I will be, what situation I find myself in. It doesn't matter. It won't matter if I'm among friends. I have some examples that come to mind without getting into details, but there's situations that I laughed a little bit to not cry. Those situations that are bad, but for some reason you want to laugh. Situations, I would see someone who was in a context where everything was fine. I mean, really, there were no conflicts. Everything mostly they matched the desires of the person. I mean, everything was going fine, and I could see that person, as the days went on, that person was generating some anxiety. There was something that was there was this anxiety growing, and the person needed to find something that wasn't going well, and then finally did, and then exploded. Why does that happen? Because we look outside, some kind of correspondence, a coherence outside with what we're feeling inside. When inside I have a conflict, I look for a reason for my conflict outside. This is part of how we are made. We look around ourselves, a correspondence for what we feel inside to justify it. And I remember some time ago, there was an interview with 2 modern philosophers. One was a historian, and one was a philosopher. And they were talking about this because they would say, how is it that often politicians live um, the people's vote by saying lies? And they would say, because what we want, we as human beings, we don't want the truth. What we want an explanation that is coherent with what we feel inside. So if inside I have anger, and you give me an object on which I can project my anger, and you say this is the reason for my malaise, you find a reason to justify my negativity, I'm going to follow you. I mean, the two basic feelings we have are attraction and aversion, and there's no easier way to manipulate people than through hatred and desire. And we do this even in our daily life. When we find someone, we want to get close to that person, what do? We look for a common enemy, for example. I want I want to have a good relationship with you, so I look for something or look for someone to criticize, and if you don't like that person, then we create a connection. Uh, so, Sometimes we can also do a faux pas and criticize something that the other person likes, but we try to make it work like this a little bit. So naturally, we try to manipulate people around us. But this just to say that at the basis, we look outside for a justification, a coherence for what we feel inside. And I don't know how to explain. I don't know how to explain this very well. I invite you to look into it. But there's a part of our brain. It's called the anterior. It's the reptilian brain. Its function is to filter the information that we receive in every moment. And there's this part of our brain that filters information. Some things we're aware about and some we're not. And what's the basis? What's the basis to be able to filter information is our attractions and our aversions. If I have a strong aversion, then I will look for some kind of justification for that aversion. And the same thing for desire. We see what we need to see. And if something is right in front of us, we won't be able to see it, for example. I mean, this is a very banal example. If we want to buy a car, for example, and at a certain point we see models, we choose a model of a car, and after we buy that car, we see that everybody has that car. And before we bought that car, we never saw it. Now we see it everywhere. Why? Because before, it wasn't in the range of our desires. But when we start having desire for something or aversion against something, we start seeing reality around us. We try to find coherence, a justification for our feelings. And we could spend hours talking about this system. There's a psychiatrist that talks about this, who says it's really important in the morning to review what you want, because according to what you want, our system will show that to you. And even without being aware of it. So when we're taken by anger, by hatred, by resentment, by fear, by dissatisfaction, and so forth, we we will see reality through those filters. Inevitably, when in, when we're taken by gratitude, love, compassion, joy, generosity, harmony, coherence, wisdom, we'll see the world through that. So it's very important for us to allow ourselves to meditate, familiarize ourselves. And this is an important point here that Lama Tsongkhapa highlights. It's not about just understanding the first noble truth that that permeating suffering is um, is suffering, but we need to meditate on it many times, because what I see happen, often we get in contact with Buddhist teachings, we like them. The first times we hear about the Four Noble Truths, for many people it's an eye opener, wow. And then after we hear that, okay, so what's the next? Okay, the three principal aspects of the path. Okay, and then the next, and the next, and they want to get to completion stage practices of Tantra, very complicated things. Oh, which on one side, okay, it's fine. But have you really familiarized yourself with the first? Because the point is not about understanding, it's feeling it. So the question that Lama Tsongkhapa asks is not what do we need to understand? No, he says, what tool do we need to use to develop this strong desire to get out of samsara? And the tool for this is meditation, this process of familiarization, in recognizing all pervasive suffering as suffering, in recognizing our inner state of ignorance, selfishness, karmic force that goes together with our anger and all the rest, these negative conditionings, as a sickness that we want to cure. It's not and it shouldn't be a process that creates suffering. Unfortunately, we often we have this at the basis of our worldview. We have this feeling of guilt. It's and this need to suffer. It's almost like seeing that I have that sickness is something negative. Someone comes to me, oh, Lama, can you pray for me? I need to have a test, or tomorrow I have an important medical exam, and then I'm thinking, what should I pray for? That during the test nothing comes out, or so that the medical exams really show what the problem is. Because if I take a test, a medical exam, I want that test to really show what is. And if a diagnosis comes out that's precise and clear, even if it's negative, thank you to the diagnosis. The problem is I can enter this conflict between this idealized image of myself and the reality that I'm experiencing. But the diagnosis is fundamental. Because if we have symptoms constantly, we go to the doctor and the doctor gives us a very precise and clear diagnosis. Thank you. I mean, that is very important, because with that, I can start a healing treatment. But if I'm afraid of the diagnosis, being afraid of the diagnosis is a way of staying sick and not facing the sickness, but staying with the symptoms. So it's not a suffering process. It's a process of maturity, where we look at ourselves and we say, okay, I finally understand why I have so many problems. And I understand that no matter where I go, it's just not working because a little bit like that joke I would tell as a child. I was about 5, 6 years old, and I would go around with this little joke. Where I touch, it hurts. I touch my head, it hurts. I touch my chin, it hurts. I touch my knee, it hurts. I touch my shoulder, it hurts. My tummy, it hurts. I touch my chest, it hurts. On and on and on. I would stay a long time, and then I would ask, "What sickness do I have?" I have pain in my finger. As long as the finger is sick, no matter where I touch myself, it's going to hurt. As long as I have mental defilements, as long as my being is polluted by mental defilements and karma, wherever I go, wherever I touch, it's going to hurt. But our tendency is to blame the conditions and try to create conditions, perfect conditions, to not feel pain. So I don't touch anyone, but that doesn't work. So understanding this is an enormous liberation, because once we understand this, we change the direction where we put our energy, and our objective is no longer about creating favorable conditions to be happy, but it's about working on our inner dynamics to allow ourselves to be well regardless of where we are. Is that difference clear? So I invite you to take meditation understood as familiarization, the familiarization, meditation on the Four Noble Truths, in particular the first one, to really to meditate it on, read it, and apply it to yourselves. Why do I suffer? What is my suffering? What is the difference between my symptoms and these moments of pleasure and the deeper state of imbalance in which I find myself? And seeing this doesn't make us suffer more, because there's an important point here, that I recognize all permeating suffering as suffering. It doesn't mean that I can't have pleasures or enjoy pleasurable things in life. We can absolutely, and we need to take advantage of pleasurable situations of all kinds. What we need to avoid is leaving this as a solution and living for these things. So if I drink something that I like, for example, here I have water with saffron, which I like very much. And we allow ourselves to enjoy it as much as possible. But when it's not there, that's fine too. Or, in other words, I don't try to hold on to that pleasure to eliminate my state of suffering. I try to create that pleasure to eliminate my suffering. That's a dynamic that we usually follow. Good. So one could save oneself from being drowned in the sufferings of samsara by wanting to get out of it. And to get out of it, we need to see it, understand what it is, to see where we are, not with a sense of guilt. And I don't know if we should talk about it now or not, but at least let's just touch on it. Somewhere, I don't know why, I have this feeling that we have a kind of expectation, an idealized image of ourselves that we should be pure. Because when we look at ourselves, I have a lot. We say I have a lot of ignorance and and selfishness and anger and jealousy, and we say, well, I shouldn't be like this. Like somewhere there's this kind of burden that we should be perfect. I don't know if you um, feel that too. But if we look, how long have we been ignorant beings? Let's start with this life. But as long as I've been alive, no? Just look at small children. I mean, even small children have jealousy and anger and envy, or are they all born Buddhas and then they get ruined as they grow? No. Even you can see the mental defilements of a newborn, of a small child, um, more in one, less in another, but it's there. So what happens is it's not that we have a pure nature understood that at one point we were pure and then at some point we are ruined. Um, this is a very wrong interpretation in my in according to me. When we talk about our pure nature, going back to our pure nature, um, we have this understanding that we are pure, we're perfect beings, and then something happened, and then we are ruined. Because if that were so, either I wasn't really pure, because if I really was pure, I wouldn't have ignorance to then become impure. So why would I put all this effort into becoming pure if I could then become impure again? Or if I was pure and then it was not my fault, but there's someone else to blame, that's even worse. So actually, if we try to look back and try to highlight a moment where when we were pure, balanced beings, we wouldn't find this. And sincerely speaking, the past is not relevant. It's not important to see where it started. My question is, what can I do today moving forward? And when we say that our nature is pure, it means it's free from dirt. It's I always say our nature is pure, it's clean, it's free from impurity. It, so it's pure, it's free from impurity, it's clean, it's free from some kind of dirt. If I say water is clean, it means that I I know that there are certain types of dirt or whatever that are not in the water. So when we say that our nature is pure, it means that in each one of us, in every aspect, we are free from an objective, independent, autonomous, intrinsic reality. We exist in an interdependent way. We exist exclusively within relationships, and we don't exist without these relationships, without this net. Just in a few words, I don't want to go too deep into this subject now. It means that if I interact in a certain way, I transform in a certain way. If I interact in another way, I transform in that way. I don't exist in a suffering, selfish way in an objective, autonomous way, but I'm an ignorant, selfish being in an interdependent way because I live in relation that that increases and sustains that state. If I change those relationships, I will change my I will change my state. In other words, I'm not condemned to live in a state of suffering because that is not my nature. If it were my nature to be suffering, I would only be able to suffer. But when my nature is to be interdependent and I live based on relations, when I change the relations, I change my reality. And for that, our objective is to change the way we interact to create and generate a balanced state of peace and joy and well being. And keeping that type of relationship, then that becomes sustainable.
Perciò
Recognizing our state of sickness is nothing other than a state where we have a way of interacting with the world and with ourselves which is unhealthy. And as long as we uphold, as long as we maintain that dynamic, we'll suffer. When we can invert and change that dynamic, then we can go towards the healing and the purity, familiarizing ourselves with this aspect, getting out of that dynamic of being the victim or wanting to simply find a momentary solution, or we want to understand our more in, our deeper inner dynamics, so the ones that make us suffer. Um, that this doesn't have to do only with our spiritual path, but even in when they're in family relationships, if there's a conflict, I think everyone's expressed has everyone has experienced a familial conflict, and so even there, it would be important to understand the causes and not just the symptoms. You know, if we eliminate the symptoms, you know, we pretend that there's nothing behind it. We sweep it under the rug, and then we have a party we enjoy. But then again, maybe someone says the wrong thing at the wrong time, and there's another explosion. And the same thing happens in the problems in society, the conflicts in that are for our wider society. So we need to we need to work on facing the sickness and not simply eliminating the symptoms. And we need to try to do that with ourselves. And this is what Buddha taught and what Lama Tsongkhapa reminds us to do. Let's go to question number 3, which says,
Mengate tuki gongnas taona korwa dile rangre nam tarwar chebe tapdamba charwa gyawe sumbe chikchok changtup ngo sheba te kanyin trios dacha sile tarwe tap tamba chargi ngesungna gyawe simba chikchokis chantul hakpe lapsum las. Se riflettiamo su questo consiglio,
if we think of that advice, then what is it that you said he could have given one single teaching on a sublime and strict method which frees us from samsara? So thinking about samsara, thinking about this, what specific method can free us from this cycle of suffering? We've understood that our suffering is not just the suffering of suffering, but there's the all-pervasive suffering that we want to get out of this cycle. So what specific teaching treats that? And Panchen no Sanchukit Gyatsen answers, if the sublime method to free ourselves from cyclic existence were closely identified, one teaching from the victor would be enough. The 3 higher trainings could be within our reach. So if we were to take all the Buddha's teachings and say, what one teaching can take me out of samsara, this is the 3 higher trainings. They resume the method to get out of samsara. So the three higher trainings, a training means to repeat, 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 and repeat something. We can spend all day saying repeat, repeat, repeat. So, so training is not about understanding, it's about repeating until that becomes natural. And here there are three fundamental trainings. So all of Buddhist teachings can be summarized in these three trainings. The first is Laba Sutren Gilaba, which is the higher training of morality. And then the next is the higher training of so our final objective is wisdom. But wisdom is not a conceptual wisdom. Here the point is not trying to understand the nature of things. Let's go a little bit roundabout to understand this. What is samsara? It's a cycle made of mental defilements, actions, and results of suffering, so-called samsara. This cycle, this karmic, can we stop karmic inertia force? There is one non-Buddhist philosophical school, a school that said that it is possible to stop karma, stop acting. And Buddha said that doesn't work because even when you think, thinking is an action, so you can't not generate karma. And you have an enormous quantity of past karmic actions and of past karmic deeds. Can you stop the results of karma? No. Because in every moment there's sensation, and sensation is how karma manifests, ripens, and then manifests into sensation. And there's a third point. The third or the first, depending on where you are, is ignorance and all of its derivatives. Yes, that's the one that we can face. And when one is missing, the other two fall down. So what happens is, so without one, two doesn't make three. We need that one. That one is ignorance and the mental defilements. What is ignorance? It's this grasping at intrinsic existence. In other words, the reality around us appears as if it existed in an independent, objective, autonomous way. And we'll talk about this later. There are more specific questions about this. So reality appears to us as being independent and solid, independent among its parts, and also from the side of the observer. Like when you see me or I see you, are you aware that what we are seeing exists based on the interdependence of the object of perception and the perceiver? No, there you are, and here I am, and that's it. And if we were to see, I was reading just a few days ago in this book on quantum physics. It says when we look at the quantum level, the most microscopic level possible, there's nothing other than relationship. It's not possible to highlight something independently uh, uh, of something else, and such is for space and time as well. So something to exist autonomously, independently just doesn't exist. Buddha said that, and now the great scientists of today confirm it. So the fundamental point of Buddhism is that we live in a in a in a dual view. We're not able to see this, and we take this wrong perception as real. I was reading this book and I wrote down this sentence, this citation. I really liked it, but I don't remember it exactly. Let's see. It's it, it's a, written by Carlo Rovelli, talking about time. When we analyze more deeply time, time as something autonomous, independent, just doesn't exist. He says, I'm going to read it in English. Here it's written in English, and like this can help Ara. Of all events that
is an effect of our blindness, our inability to recognize small temporal intervals. It is an illegitimate extrapolation of our parochial experience. The presence is like the flatness of the earth, an illusion. Okay.
in other words, he's saying that now doesn't exist, but saying that our feeling, when we say now, it's our inability. We are blind to see things as they really are. These temporal intervals. What happens is our brain works on the basis of perception in a certain time interval. We're not able to see things that happen if they're shorter than a certain millisecond. So when we're close, and what's happening in you, and what I see, it's not happening actually at that same time, because the light that hits you and comes to me, but in that very, very short time where we live it as if it were now. But this presence, this idea of present now, is an illusion, similar to this perception of the planet Earth being flat. I mean, if we're at the seaside, if we're in the desert, we see the world as flat. Is it flat, or is it because we're so small and the Earth is so big? If we lived in a small planet like the Little Prince, we would see the Earth as being round. So what happens is this interdependence happens on such a deep level, and we have a perception that is so generalized that we're not able to see. In the same way, we're not able to see the roundness of the earth, but that doesn't mean that the earth isn't round. So in this case, what is ignorance? Ignorance is the fact that the earth appears as being flat, and we relate to the earth as if it were flat. We grasp to this appearance as being real. In the same way, everything appears to us as being autonomous, independent, including ourselves, and we relate to them as if it were real. This distance from reality, this non perception of the interdependence of things takes us to not see how we're related to other things. That increases, it creates um, this selfishness and this grasping at ourselves and all the mental defilements that generate suffering. And here there's a very important point. And this subject, we'll talk about it further along with more detail. But this is something that I've never read anywhere. It could be right or it could be wrong. Suffering is nothing other than a manifestation of our system to show that we are incoherent, that there's something that is out of balance. Nature in general is always trying to go back to states of balance. Like like the other day I was listening to a lesson on weather. I'm not a passion. I'm not because I have a barometer at home, and I was asking myself what its purpose was, and so the atmosphere should the nature would want to create the same temperature everywhere, but that's not possible. The surfaces of the earth are not the same, and it changes. It's moving, around the sun and also turning around its own axis, and it just creates different temperatures and different pressure. But the atmosphere is trying to create balance, and our system is going towards this kind of balance. So when we have choices or behavior on a coarse, subtle or very subtle level that take us to imbalance, our being shows us that there's something out of sync. And this comes out in symptoms and suffering. And what we need is to find balance. And in this case would be harmony and coherence. And according to Buddha, the fundamental reason for our suffering is a deep disharmony between ourselves and reality, where we live ourselves and everything in an incoherent, disharmonious way, and this translates into suffering. So the final key is to find that balance, that harmony, so we could live ourselves and everything around us coherently. It's impermanent. I live it as impermanent. It's interdependent. I live it as being interdependent. I live the subjective reality as being subjective, not like us, that we live the subjective reality as being objective. And someone could say, okay, let's go right there if that's the problem. And Buddha says, I'm sorry, but that doesn't work like that. First, before you can train in wisdom, this inner state where one can live in a non-conceptual way, the coherently with nature, one needs to have great control over one's mind, because our mind familiarizes itself through familiarization. I can't repeat something that I don't know exists, and to generate a state of coherence, a so-called wisdom, we need to direct our mind. And so here we have the training of concentration, meditative concentration. But to train in concentration, I need to have control my um, over my behavior. So first we have the training in morality. So training in morality is not, it's not ethics. So training in ethics, this you can do, this you cannot do. Morality is a process about understanding what is good for me and what is harmful, and where we develop the determination and the strength to develop what is good for us and abandon what is harmful. How we eat, how we sleep, how we speak, and how we think. Because it's not possible to have control and direct our mind if we're not able to control our speech. And here there's something I'd like to add. Very often when we talk about taking care of our speech, we imagine talking and communicating with others, but it goes much beyond. Taking care of our speech is also how we talk to ourselves, the words that we use with ourselves, the way we speak to ourselves, because the way we speak is the way that we think. It determines how we think. An example that I heard just a short time ago that I really liked, for example, if I now it's 8 minutes after 1, and I want to and I say I want to finish by 1:15. There are only 7 minutes. If I say there are only 7 minutes, what does that generate within? Some kind of threat. Oh, I'm not going to be able to finish. I'm not going to finish on time, and then people need to eat, and then it generates anxiety. And then what happens? I have only now 6 minutes, and what happens? There's this threat, and I have a reaction of stress, and cortisol arises, etc., etc. Instead, if I say, I have still five, I still have 5 minutes. So instead of only, I say again, or still. If I say I still have 5 minutes, I say, oh, how wonderful! I can finish what I was saying. I still have time. And it changes completely the physiological reaction that we have, because when we create a threat, we react to that threat with cortisol, etc. It's a stress reaction. So controlling our speech it needs to be also how we talk to ourselves, the words that we use. When we say that we should avoid lying, first of all, we shouldn't lie to ourselves. And then obviously you shouldn't lie to others. So the first of the 3 higher trainings is having a healthier life and training in that, because no one is born knowing how to do everything. It's a process of repetition where first we listen, we learn, we reflect on something, we understand something, and we familiarize ourselves with that. So I understand that it's better not to say certain words. So take away, for example, if. It's forbidden to say if. If it were like this, if you had done this or done that. Also with ourselves. One understands why, one reflects on it and then tries to put it into practice until it completely disappears from one's vocabulary and changes one's way of thinking. So the training is the first training is training in morality. I repeat, morality means recognizing what's beneficial and learning to generate it, um, and learning, recognizing what's negative and avoiding it. Once I'm able to once I'm able to direct my my physical and mental uh, um, behavior, first we need to direct our speech correctly before we can direct our mind. You can't direct your mind if you haven't first directed your speech. And here, again, morality is essential, how we act physically, verbally, and mentally. Once we have a good level of morality, that al- allows us to overcome our strong dissatisfaction, because along the process of morality, we understand that this endless research for happiness is negative, and we go beyond our we
genera ansia.
we go beyond our addictions to our cell phones, our addictions to sugar, our addictions to coffee. Um, you know, so we can go beyond this mental agitation, this gupa. So once we learn how to have more satisfaction, which is part of this first training of morality, then we can start training in concentration. Being more satisfied, we can have concentration. And when we have concentration, that allows us to deepen thinkings and not stay on the surface. And that opens the door to develop wisdom, to observe reality on a deeper way and familiarize ourselves. Um, so if we ask, what is the path transmitted by Buddha, the path to get out of samsara, we need to train in morality, concentration, and wisdom. And someone might say, well, where's Tantra and the sadhanas and the practices? Those are tools that help us along this process within the practice of self-healing, for example, or any other sadhana. There's the training of morality, concentration, and wisdom. Now, without getting into the details, because we still have 30 seconds. So we have a tool in our hands, and this is what's important, because not only do we see that we're in samsara, not only do we recognize that recognize all pervasive suffering as suffering, but there is a way to change this dynamic, because we are interdependent. Our nature allows us to change. We exist only in a very complex net of interactions, and when those interactions change, reality changes. And this is made up of our actions, our interactions. So our way of acting physically, verbally, and mentally, little by little, changes our reality. And this is important for us to see that there's something that we can do. But the danger is, when I'm not training in the right way, I'm probably training in the wrong way, because when I'm not familiarizing myself with a healthy lifestyle, I'm familiarizing myself with an unhealthy lifestyle. So this process of training needs to be constant, continuous, and omnipresent. And then we can have marvelous, marvelous results. It's true that we won't be able to do it in every aspect, but if we're able to give a certain constancy, that will give wonderful results. Okay, so the essence of the practice of the teachings of Buddhist teachings, the essence of Buddhist teachings is training in love towards ourselves, morality, concentration, the control over our mind, presence in this present moment, direct ourselves in more awareness and wisdom, an experience of coherence with reality as it really is. It's time for our dedications.
Losan tempe drome sasumgi drove munsel taktu ne gyurchi kewa kuntu yanda lama dang drame cheki pela longche ching sada lamge yente dorje changi kopa nyur top sho nimo dele tsendele Ninsen taktu delekpe kuncho sumke chingi lop kuncho sumke ngodrubot sol kuncho sumke trashisho.
At dawn or at dusk, at night or during the night, may the three jewels grant us their blessings. May they help us to achieve all realizations and sprinkle the path of our lives with various signs of auspiciousness.
At dawn or dusk, at night or midday, may the three jewels grant us their blessings. May they help us to achieve all realizations and spring all the path of our lives with various signs of auspicious. Oma huntambala me sangerimbo che kyobala me tamchorimbo che trimbala me gendurim kyamne kuncho sumla chopa locho sambo pagyu trashi pa tuche tempe chingle yar pegerulo zambe zebra che pande lame shela chopa. Buon appetito.
Have a good lunch.